and leaders of our church as we journey through topics that inform, engage, and inspire the daily life of our church.
Hello and welcome back to the Roundtable with Pulaski Heights United Methodist Church, a podcast with substance. Today we are continuing our conversation about women in ministry. And so I am Kathleen McMurray. I am the pastor of Connecting Ministries and Worship.
I'm Abbey Maynard. I'm the pastor of Community Ministries.
I'm Katye Chambers. I'm the associate pastor.
And I'm Rowland, and I am the minister to youth and families.
So we've talked a lot about our callings, about the Bible. I remember last week as we looked at the time at the end of that episode, how much time we'd spent, we all were like, we really like talking about the Bible.
Yeah.
So we've talked about those things. Today I wanted to start by asking what your hopes and dreams for what the future looks like for women in ministry are. What are those hopes and dreams?
My hope would be that women have equal access to all areas and aspects of leadership in the life of the church. We've talked a little bit about not only women as preachers, but women in theological education and women in academic scholarship of the Bible. One thing we haven't really talked about is this thing that exists where women can be everything but the senior pastor. Right? In churches that have multiple clergy on staff. And so we've come so far, even in a denomination that's been ordaining women for a long time, but we still have a long way to go. So that would be my dream, is women having access to all areas of leadership in the life of the church and the academy and religious life.
I think for me in my area, it's been such an interesting thing to enter into youth ministry in a time where we're really transitioning from the stereotype of youth ministers to be young men with a big beard and skinny jeans and a skateboard to and a guitar all at the same time to really a women's dominated field, at least in United Methodism and mainline denominational churches. We're seeing a lot of women enter into youth ministry in a way that's really exciting. And so in that aspect, the other thing that I'm hoping that all women get this chance to do is to have access to all of the things that help us do our job well. That Perkins School of Youth Ministry continues to be a place that's extremely accessible for female youth workers to go and receive the same level of education and certification as men. And that seminary spaces, now that we're incorporating more than just ordained elders into seminary spaces, that we start doing more within seminary to say youth work and women in youth work is an area that we can start doing more scholarship and equipping people in very accessible ways. Because we still live in a society where women and mothers are saddled with a lot of responsibilities outside of just their job, and making seminary and making certifications and continuing education accessible is still something like, can we bring babies to class? Right? I mean, that's always going to be a new question that starts coming up. Or can we do more things online? Can we do those sorts of things? So I'm excited to see how our ecosystem, especially in United Methodism, keeps growing to say, how can we include more women and more women in spaces that aren't always just being an elder?
Right. Well, because like Katye said, academia is critically important to have those voices of women teaching our future youth ministers, deacons, elders, lay leaders is really critically important. What do you think, Abbey? What are some of your hopes and dreams?
I very much resonate with the things that have been said, but I hope that anybody who's going to be a Christian has gotten to see a female pastor, that nobody comes in and is surprised, that it just stops being a surprise, that it becomes the norm, and that it stops being a question of like, oh, there's a woman pastor, that it just becomes there's the pastor, and that any kid can imagine themselves becoming the pastor, and that they feel like they can learn from anybody, because lay, clergy, whatever gender, we all have something that we can share.
Right.
And that's really important. And so just for it not to become a novelty.
Right.
Well,
and I think like along with that, Katie, you said, this senior pastor space is often the next step in women in ministry, seeing more women in those top leadership positions in a way that becomes less of a novelty, and that churches, if they see more women, if that becomes a thing that people can see more women in the pulpit, they can see more women as pastors, more women as leaders. If they're seeing more of that, then you don't have the folks that say, well, we had a woman once and it didn't work out.
Mm-hmm.
And then often, so we don't want another one.
Yeah.
And everyone that has been through appointments or has worked in those spaces has had that happen.
And assuming that there is one way that women lead,
right,
or one way that women preach. We all have different personalities. We all have very different leadership styles, and that is regardless of our gender. We're not tied to that. We're not all the same.
Surprise.
And so, I would definitely hope that as we continue to see more women in leadership in all aspects of the church, and more women at those senior pastor positions at large churches, I really have hope that can become more of a norm, and less of a novelty, for sure. As you think about the future, what advice would you give, or what would you tell to someone who is considering going into ministry?
It's never too late. I work a lot with seminarians, and a lot of our incoming students the last years have been second career folks. Perhaps because it's just now really becoming acceptable. Once you get out of the span of life where you're raising children or you're pursuing other careers, to say, okay, well, now I can do ministry. And so, we shared, all of us were called to ministry at a younger age. But if you're mid-career and continuing to feel the pull of the Holy Spirit to answer a call to ministry, do it.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. What about you, Ellen?
I think the best advice, and this came out of, I worked with Hendricks Youth Institute, which is a program that's put on by our conference in conjunction with Hendricks College to help teenagers who are discerning ministry really understand what that means for them and all the different avenues and ways that you can take, because it can be a lot to navigate. But something that came up in conversation with them over and over and over again is that sometimes we say, if I say yes to my call to ministry, I have to be a perfect person. And everyone's looking at me and everyone's watching me. And I just hope that any young person or any person that's thinking about ministry knows that God calls you as you are, and we're called to live a life that is honest, not one that is perfect. And I think that, to me as a young person, would have been the biggest relief to know that I'm just called as who I am.
I think I would say both. It's worth it, because I think everybody who's nervous about going into ministry has seen all of the challenges, and they're like, I don't know if I want to take on all of that. So I would first say there is so much that balances out all of the challenges that come with it. But I would also say your calling is going to change, and that's a good thing, and it's a normal thing. And so if you feel a call right now, at this point, I say chase it and see what it is, because, it could shift and change. And that is something that I've kind of had to grapple with, but it's become one of the really beautiful things, because it's a way to learn, what God is doing and more about who you are. And And that constantly changing calling, I think, is one of the really beautiful things that comes out of taking that leap to say, yes, I'm going to see what God is trying to do.
Right. I think that idea of having to be perfect or having to, and feeling like you've got to have it all figured out.
Yeah.
I mean, from just in the secular world, we're asking kids really early now to make decisions about, what is the rest of your life going to look like? You're taking these classes in 8th grade that are going to impact your GPA for high school, that's going to impact whether you can get into college and med school and so on and so forth. And it's like, goodness gracious, we don't have it all together when we're 13, and we don't have it all together when we're 30. That's who we are, and that life is messy, and you don't have to have everything figured out. I think that's something that I would say is exploring is a good thing. Exploring and listening and talking, and certainly any of us, if you're listening or watching this and you're like, I don't know, I might be called to something. God's calling me to something, and I mentioned a couple of episodes ago about my mom. She decided she wasn't called to ordained ministry. She was called to lay ministry. And for folks, they may be called to that. They may be called to serve in different ways. But if you're
be reminded of. And so what I love about Parker's work is it's one of those books, like I could read his works every year, like the Bible. Every time you read it, you notice something else. You hear something else that you need for the season of life that you're in, for the moment that you're in. And so I've been really grateful and really blessed by Parker Palmer's work.
For me, Lisa Sharon Harper is an author that I have found just a lot of really wonderful nuggets of wisdom from. Her book, The Very Good Gospel. It kind of looks at this holistic approach to the gospel and to the through line of God's work in creation and God who is still creating and what God is doing. And it's she does so much about justice in that, and humans being created in the image of God. And if that's where we ground ourselves, if that's kind of at the crux of the gospel, and Jesus entering into that image of God with us in humanity and bringing about resurrection, then the way that we treat one another is really important. And there's a call for justice, for racial justice, and for equity and inclusion and all of these things. And so, Lisa Sharon Harper's a really great author that I love. I also like reading Rachel Held Evans, who died far too soon, and her work on kind of rethinking, deconstructing as a former evangelical has been really, influential for a lot. The stuff that y'all have said. Kate Bowler,
yes,
as well, out of Duke.
Everything happens for a reason. Other lies I've loved.
That wrestling with those questions of life, and I think that one of the things too, we mentioned in one of our previous episodes, Katie was talking about like the need for women in academia, the need for women in biblical scholarship. And I would just, encourage everyone as we're thinking about women in ministry, as we're thinking about what this looks like, whenever we're reading, to look at who we're reading, to look at the authors and to try and get voices that are different from our own experiences, and to get voices, for so many years, just the predominant voices of all biblical interpretation in academia was white Western men. And so to hear those different voices, to see biblical interpretation from women and people of color and the queer community, to see those different things that are coming, I think is so important to look at ourselves and to read people who are going to challenge us to look at things differently. Well, is there anything else as we conclude our our 3 weeks on women in ministry. Anything else that y'all want to share with our audience or our church, our community?
I just want to lift up how amazing it is that we have so many female clergy and ministers on staff at this church. You know, we really do live in a world where there are people like Abbey was talking about, I think maybe last episode, that, you know, in some smaller towns, they've never seen a woman in ministry. It's not that they don't believe it, they've just never seen it. And it's such an honor to be on staff with so many just high level, capable, wonderful clergy women. So
this is an awesome place to be a woman in ministry.
Yeah. And I think it's really great too that Pulaski Heights, we've talked in previous roundtables about just the gift that we have of being on television, and what a gift that is for folks all over the state and beyond with the internet to be able to worship with us. And I think being able to be on television and to have, for folks in those towns where they may have never seen a woman in the pulpit in their church, if they turn on their television on Sunday mornings, they can see a woman. They can see a female pastor. They can see female leaders and what that looks like. And I think that's so incredible that we have the privilege and the honor of being a part of that. Well, thank you so much for joining us once more for the Roundtable from Pulaski Heights United Methodist Church, a podcast of discussions with substance. We hope that you will tune in next week, that you'll have a great week, and that you'll tell someone about Pulaski Heights United Methodist Church.